Welcome to the HealthiHer Podcast. Your host, Dr. Amy Brenner, is a board-certified OBGYN with additional certifications in functional and integrative medicine. This podcast is meant to help women find reliable, relevant information to help them feel better, look better, and live better. Here you will hear in-depth information about hormones, sexual medicine, aesthetics, cosmetic gynecology, and functional medicine.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the HealthiHer Podcast. I'm just curious, how are your 2022 New Year's resolutions going? I don't know. If you're like me, I've just never been good about following through with my resolutions. Last year, I had this resolution that I was going to read at a minimum of 2 books a month. I was going to read a book for pleasure every month, and then a book like for work and personal development each month. That did not go so well. So I would say maybe I did that for 2 months, and then it just fell off the wagon. And then I just had this feeling of like, I'm just not very good. I can't stick to what I say I'm going to do. In fact, I was so motivated that I actually got my husband on board and said that we were going to read books together. So I actually, for Christmas, in anticipation of that New Year's resolution, bought like 2 copies of our first couple of books. And he didn't even finish the first book. So anyway, if you're like a lot of people, New Year's resolutions don't always pan out. Having said that, I do think it is important to set goals and kind of dividing those goals up into different categories. And so what is your financial goal for this year? What is your goal for your relationships? What is your goal in your business? And, you know, as it relates to my business, we really get organized there and subdivide those goals into yearly goals and quarterly goals and monthly goals. And not just financial goals, but, you know, what do we want to revise with patient education information? Where do we want to be with podcasts, writing a book, revising the website? This year, our goal is to remodel our office. And so you get the picture. But what I want to focus on is not so much setting goals, because sometimes you set these goals and sometimes these goals are non-specific, and then you end up being disappointed. Now, in my case of reading those books, my goal was very specific of reading 1 book a month. And I think that's really important of setting goals instead of I want to be a better reader. Well, that might be the end goal, but the specific goal would have been to read a book every month. Where I'm getting at is that I think you just end up being a happier person by looking back at your accomplishments rather than looking forward of, I want to be somewhere in the future. And it just seems so unattainable. Similar to looking at the horizon. We all know what the horizon is where the sky and the water meet. And you could start swimming. And even if you keep swimming and swimming and swimming, or you're on a boat and you go miles and miles, getting to that horizon is, as we know, it's never going to happen. And so sometimes it can feel overwhelming, or am I even making any progress? Until you look behind you and see, look how far I've come. And so that's what I really wanted to focus on today. Just a little twist on, instead of looking at what is your New Year's resolution and how are you doing on that, but changing your mindset of looking at how far you've come and looking at your successes rather than being disappointed with failure to achieve goals. The best person that actually taught me this is my husband. Does a really good job every year is it's now become our favorite gift for myself and even for my teenage children is he writes us a Christmas letter every year, and it focuses on basically our year in review of what we did that year, what we accomplished, things we did together. So, for instance, his letter to me might be things that things we did together as a couple, some special dates we had, concerts or plays we went to, or vacations, and elaborating on different moments we had together, highlights of kind of our kids' achievements. And he does that for my kids too. So, for instance, in one of my kids' letters, he'll talk about, what they accomplished in school and what they accomplished in their sports and some good family moments to remember. And sometimes it's hard to remember. So he always, he's not on Facebook, but he'll log into my Facebook and kind of look at my digital scrapbook as a reminder, and then go through our calendar settings to help jog his memory. And it's a great way to kind of summarize the year of look what we've accomplished. And it just gives you an overwhelming sense of like feel good and happy instead of here's all the places I want to be. Now, I don't want to discourage anybody from setting goals because I also think that's important. But I also think it's important when you're setting goals to be very specific. So, for instance, if one of your goals with your relationships is to have a better relationship with your significant other, that's a great goal. But how are you going to get there? And so a better goal would be I'm going to go on a date night with my significant other once a month, once a week, with the end goal of having a better relationship. I want to be wealthier. Well, that's just a really non-specific goal. And what's the end game there? Are you going to be satisfied if you have 10,000 in the bank, 10 million in the bank? Is kind of wealth, or it's kind of like boats. Is it ever enough? Because once you get to one place, you want more and more. Or I've heard in the boating situation is once you have a boat, then you want the next bigger boat. So it just would be a lot more specific to say, by the end of this year, I want to save, X amount of dollars. And then to get there is how much am I going to save per week? How much am I going to save per month? How much am I going to save per quarter? And so just being very specific. One of my favorite people or mentors or somebody I really look up to in the business world, his name is Dan Sullivan, and he's the owner and developer of a company called Strategic Coach. And this is something I went through several years ago, and it's for people that own their own business, because I never took any business courses. And as you know, I do own my own practice, and running a business is really foreign to me. So it was a great course of really, mainly it was about setting your mindset. And just as it relates to setting a business or running a business is, especially when I first started 10 and a half years ago, it was really overwhelming of looking at other practices of, I want to be there, but how will I ever get there? Is they do this, they have a website, they have a podcast, they have videos, they have all of these things. And, but how you really get there is by, just kind of churning it out one day at a time with daily goals, weekly goals, quarterly goals, and yearly goals, and having them be very specific. But sometimes when you're looking forward, you can get into overwhelm, and it can actually make you stressed, unhappy, versus looking in the rear and looking behind you And that's what gives you a lot of satisfaction and really celebrating those wins. And so Dan Sullivan wrote a really easy to read book, and it's called The Gap versus the Gain. And what that means is when you're looking at the horizon of something that's really unattainable, you always have a gap because you're never going to get there. Versus if you're looking behind of how far I've come, then you're going to be met with satisfaction and happiness of look at all of these things I've accomplished and celebrating those accomplishments. Some key components that he goes over in the book is that you never want to compare yourself to anybody else because there's always going to be somebody that's better than you, better looking than you, wealthier than you, in my case, probably has a better practice than me, in better shape than you. So it's really important to stop the me versus them game and really just compare yourself to yourself and your own accomplishments. Another point he likes to elaborate on this book is really diving deep of what does it mean when you're in the gap? Is when you're in the gap, you feel like you haven't accomplished anything. It's because even though you've moved forward and had accomplishments, your ideal is just so distant from you because it's always a moving target. It might even get bigger. So say in my case, I wanted to have a medical practice. Well, I always felt like when I get to this point, I'm going to stop working on evenings and nights and weekends. The thing is, though, is there's always going to be things to do. And in my case, as I got bigger, the problems got bigger, which can actually leave you feeling worse off than when you started. But if you turn around and get in the gain and measure, wow, look how far I came over the past 10 years. Again, as it relates to my medical practice, is when I started, it was just me and 3 or 4 staff members. And as many of you know, now it's me and another physician, Dr. Tiemann, and several nurse practitioners, et cetera, et cetera. And then when I look back and think, look at all of these things I accomplished or we accomplished, it's so rewarding instead of looking at the horizon of all the things that are in my to-do list. So how do you get there? It's literally like flipping a switch. And again, as I mentioned, I would probably say my whole life, I always operated in the gap of setting goals. This is where I want to be. I want to be skinnier. I want to be in better shape. I want to have more money, first getting out of debt, which, obviously going to med school, and I called it my imaginary mansion I was paying for, starting a medical practice, all those things. I grew up living in the gap, is kind of always searching until I did the strategic coach course and read this book. And it's literally like flipping a switch and saying, I'm going to set goals. I'm going to set daily goals. And then every day, here's my things I'm going to accomplish. But I'm not going to always focus on the goals. I'm going to focus on the gain and just changing my thinking to look at how much I've accomplished. And it's just so much a better place to live in. Now, you might think that measuring backwards is counterintuitive, as it is to most people. We're used to setting New Year's resolutions. We're used to setting goals. But if you just flip that switch and say, I'm going to focus on what I've gained, and for every 24-hour period, you're going to see how much further along you've come from that fixed starting point. So my advice to you as you set goals, set New Year's resolutions, is set specific goals. And then give yourself the freedom and permission to aim for realistic, measurable goals. And you'll get a sense of progress every single day by measuring back to your starting point. So, hope that helped. Hope you can flip the switch and focus on what you've accomplished instead of doing what I did for the first 50 years of my life of being disappointed when I didn't live up to my New Year's resolutions.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Healthy Her. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and the web. Go to www.dramybrenner.com to learn more. This podcast is for general information only and does not constitute as medical advice, the practice of medicine, nursing, or other healthcare services. No patient-physician relationship is formed. The information in the podcast and any references, material, or links are at the sole discretion of the listener and not meant to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listeners should not delay or disregard obtaining medical advice for any medical issues or diagnoses that they may have, and should seek medical advice from their healthcare provider for any such conditions.